think that site is really
Artifacts.
important to us because of our family heritage. It was the lands where our great-grandfather, Gardner Goodridge, and our great-grandmother, Polly, Chichiel, that's where they made their, they homesteaded that land, as well as other family members. Polly, Chichiel, her sister, and her husband lived right across the waterway there. So I think before natural resources came involved, Jennifer and I would often visit that land just because we felt like we were, closest to our ancestors, and it would bring us back to more of our traditional ways being there on site.
Stillaguamish Restoration is a really cool project looking at expanding a lot of tidal habitat that can be used by rearing salmon. One of the problems we have in this area is the levee systems that were established in the late 1800s. We've had ever since then decreasing habitat for salmon as development has encroached upon them. And this is taking a small step, a chunk of that habitat back for the salmon to use. This is an area that has been used by the Stillaguamish Tribe for many thousands of years. This was a very important area to tribal members. Back before white settlers came here, you didn't go to the grocery store. The grocery store was the salt water, and that was where you were able to get most of your food. And if you were to come to Ziziba before 1880, you would have seen cedar all the way down to the water. It was everywhere. The whole area, if you look at the Coast Guard key sheets, show how forested this area was, and it was wild. And it was full of habitat. It was alive. And so we're trying to take one little piece of that and get that back.
We've been, brought up to respect our elders, to respect our ancestors, and I think by supporting the dikes coming down and bringing our land back to its natural state, that is our way of respecting our ancestors.
I don't know, I was just excited to see it, like how it was when our ancestors lived there.
I became involved in this project originally because Guy Miller of Cardno was working on some of the design and permitting for the project with the Stillaguamish Tribe. During this survey, we found an archaeological site. It was part of the historic homestead that was on the property. We just found the surface area, the surface scatter for the homestead. We didn't find any other tribally significant resources, and we didn't find any pre-contact archaeology. And we also found items such as golf balls. We still have some materials there, but both of the inadvertent discoveries that we did have were determined not eligible for the National Register as well. Working on Ziziba was really an interesting project. It was great to work with the tribe and to get to know them really well. It's such a rich area in history and tribal use that it's a really special place. The restoration aspect and the what is to come was really exciting for us.
Our Chinook recovery plan, which was developed in 2005 with a lot of partners in the watershed, and we came up with a list of limiting factors that are reducing the productivity and abundance of Chinook in the Stillaguamish. So we're looking at things like sediment, riparian areas, large wood. Estuaries was a bottleneck for Chinook salmon. We hope to see more estuary habitat open up that fish can use. The estuary as a bottleneck is really an area where we can get a lot of return of adult fish, and they can spawn successfully, they can reproduce, the young will come out of the gravel, migrate downstream, and then there's not enough estuary for those fish to make the journey they need to make. So think the best way to look at it is think of it as a nursery. It's where the fish are coming out of the gravel, migrate downstream, try to fatten themselves up before they head out into the open ocean and compete with all the other fish out there. So estuary is like a nursery for the fish.
The project at Zissaba was challenging on several fronts. If you've ever been out to the site, you realize it's kind of in the middle of a pretty built environment. It's right across from the city of Stanwood. It's right in the middle of agricultural operations that are pretty intensive. And so working in that sort of environment, there was a lot of concern that restoring tidal access and river access to the property could impact those stakeholders. And so they were pretty nervous. And so we tried to build trust with those stakeholders and meet with them over time, but it took some time. There was a period where we weren't sure if the project was going to go forward. I mean, there was maybe the talk of legal challenge and that sort of thing. And we really worked with the stakeholders to understand what their concerns were. And then we worked with Cardno and the engineers to make sure that those concerns were dealt with in a way that was robust. And we felt confident that we could promise to be good neighbors and not impact their interests. So the day we had planned to breach the dikes and let the tides back into Zissaba also happened to correspond with probably the strongest windstorm of the year. And it was steady 30, 40 mile an hour winds, gusts over 50. It was a high tide anyway, which we wanted because we wanted to have that low tide that is associated with the high tide. So we needed the low, but the high was about 16 or 18 inches higher than the engineers had forecast. And with the wind and the tidal surge, the storm surge, it was a little bit, things went a little sideways. So we had only planned to work on one side of the project, and it was separated by a berm that ran down the middle. But it was pretty obvious about 3/4 of the way through the tide that berm wasn't going to hold the water back, and the elevation that we thought the tide was going to get to was definitely lower than what the tide was going to get to. And so it started spilling over into the other side where we weren't working, and that had us scrambling a bit. But the contractor, Trimac, they came up with, and Dan and Sky, the engineers at Cardno, came up with a plan to kind of modify the next few days of operations to deal with that extra water that then was trapped in the site. So we had to let that water out before we could finish all the rest of the breaching around the perimeter of the site. But at the time, it kind of, I guess, recalibrated everyone to what Mother Nature can do. And it was a good reminder that she's in charge.
We're a team of river engineers and scientists. More than half of what we do is salmon habitat restoration in the Pacific Northwest. Zissaba is a project. It used to be an estuary. For the last 100 and some years, it's been diked and drained and farmed. So my role was, as engineer, and my team of geomorphologists and fish biologists and permit specialists and archaeologists and design engineers and hydraulic modelers looked at this site to see how we could replicate what was there in the past to create a maximum amount of habitat that we could. So in order to create habitat, we're going to breach the dike in several locations to flood it twice a day with the tides to recreate that estuary. As important as restoring the habitat was the protection of our neighbors.
Zissaba was the first major tidal wetland project that the tribe has undertaken. And so there's a goal in the Chinook Recovery Plan of several thousand acres of tidal wetland restoration in the Stillaguamish Delta. So we're going to need to be doing quite a few more projects in the future. And so this was great experience for the tribe and for our staff of the tribe on how to undertake these projects successfully and work with the local community, work with the stakeholders and their concerns, and really come up with a project that protects their interests, builds trust across those stakeholder relationships, but yet still does something really significant for fish and wildlife populations that makes progress towards those ambitious goals.